Welcome back to another Delay of Game NBA podcast. And today we'll be discussing basically an off-season recap, as well as the different trade scenarios that has been occurring, the James Harden trade scenario, a few others as well. And I'm here with my good friend
Emmanuel Bempon.
Yeah, there he is. And we'll be discussing. We'll first start off with the James Harden trade scenario, as I mentioned. So James Harden, obviously a disgruntled superstar. You never want to see it. It's the worst thing that can happen to a franchise. Where do you think James Harden's going to be going?
It's a really tough scenario. Before I even mention, I just want to say that I personally think James Harden is a top 5 NBA player. And I want him to become a winner. It's going to be tough for him to stay in Houston. You know, obviously there's just a lot of drama and he hasn't been attending training camp. Realistically, a trade destination would happen. His first preferred destination was Brooklyn Nets, but I don't think that would happen. I think James Harden will be a really good fit in either Philly or, if possible, the Miami Heat.
Right. And a lot of people like the idea of him going to the Nets. They like the idea of having 3 potential superstars on one team, but I just don't see the Nets scrummaging any kind of valuable deal that the Houston Rockets are willing to take. Like, the best you can offer is Karis LeVert. That's the best asset you can offer, and that's you out of a top 5 player, right? You want something. You want a for sure superstar out of James Harden, and I think recently the Miami Heat said they'll stop pursuing James Harden for the time being, which I think is a smarter move, because
that's correct.
I don't think James Harden is going to be traded until the trade deadline, until nearing the trade deadline. I think he's going to remain on Houston Rockets until the trade deadline, where he'll be moved. And I agree. I do like the Philly fit with Daryl Morey there now and new coaching staff. And if he was to go to Philly, what do you think the trade package would be? You'd have to include Ben Simmons, right?
Yeah, you would have to include Ben Simmons because, again, James Harden is very valuable. But even though James Harden will be a good fit for Philly, it's going to be tough to find a great trade. I would have to give Ben Simmons and possibly some future round picks for this upcoming draft. But I don't know. What trade offers do you think could happen?
I'm looking
for
at the
Philly.
Same. Yeah, for Philadelphia, I'm looking obviously Ben Simmons, some draft picks because Houston did give up some of them in the Russell Westbrook trade.
Yes.
So they're a little low on draft picks, but I also see them most likely giving up like a player like Matisse Thybulle or a similar
That's what I was,
You'd have to. This is a top 5 player you're getting in return. That you've already set up a system. Now, frankly, I really like Philly's current roster, and I'll tell you why. Last year we saw basically the most dysfunctional roster. Even though on paper it looked pretty good, you were getting Josh Richardson, who the year before on Miami was averaging like 17 to 20 points a game. You were getting Al Horford, which we knew was the Joel Embiid stopper. So now he's on your team, so that's great. And I really like how they were able to get rid of that contract out for, I believe it was Danny Green, which was awesome. That was a great trade. By
also Dwight Howard.
And Dwight Howard. They traded Josh Richardson away for Seth Curry, who's proven he's been able to create his own offense a little bit, and he's a dead shot 3-point shooter. So now you have shooting surrounding Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. Great spacing. You have Danny Green, who's fell off a little bit in the playoffs, and we know all the slander he's been getting, but he's still a solid 3-and-D player.
Exactly.
And
is Tobias Harris still on the team?
Tobias Harris is still on the team, and that's
okay. Great asset.
Yeah, he provides shooting. I mean, his defense is I guess average. He's got the size for it, but I really like this Philly roster, and I actually believe in them a lot more than a lot of other teams in the East. I think they potentially could be a top 3 seed in the East, even with a stacked East this year. Like, you have
Yes.
Nets, he's guaranteed a top 2 seed in the East.
Yeah,
You
easily.
have Boston Celtics, who's can only get better. They can't get any worse now. They can only get better. They just added Tristan Thompson, which I think is an
big addition.
Underrated addition, yeah, because he brings championship experience. He's still quick enough to keep up with some of the guards on the outside, but if they do need to play small, they still have Daniel Tice.
Yeah.
And you have Miami, who again can only get better, right? They
can only get better.
Yeah, they added Mo Harkless and Avery Bradley to replace Derrick Jones Jr. and Jay Crowder.
Yeah, very good draft class.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, exactly. They have Precious Achua, who I think was one of the steals of the draft when he was picked. I think 18th. I think that was
exactly. Yeah.
You still have Bam Adebayo, who you just gave that extension to.
Mm-hmm.
So the East is looking very nice right now, but I still think that Philadelphia can pull through and win a top 3 seed because now their roster works. We've seen how impactful having Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid on the same court at the same time is, and they're just really good.
Yeah, very very great duo. I'm not a super fan of Philadelphia 76ers, but I just want them to succeed this year. As you mentioned earlier, the earlier seasons, it has been dysfunctional, especially this past season. I just want them to get over that hump, so I hope all these changes will make them at least top 3 in the East, or at least top 5.
Yeah, and especially with a GM like Daryl Morey, who isn't afraid to make those big trades, to make those big changes on the roster, and take big risks. It's instead of playing it safe like Elton Brand has, and signing people on ridiculous contracts to the Tobias Harris and Al Horford contract. It's gonna the Philadelphia is looking really nice and looking really promising for the future. All right,
and I'd just like to say quickly, I forgot Doc Rivers, new head coach.
Yeah, new head coach.
Championship DNA.
We know, yeah, and with the 08 Celtics. Although we do know him as a playoff choker. But he's had some off-season success. He's definitely had more off-season success than Brett Brown. All right, and he's definitely a little more flexible than Brett Brown. He's a little more adaptable, and it's only gonna be good things for Philadelphia from him. All right, let's move west.
I truly believe that too.
Yeah. Let's move west. Let's talk about the Lakers and their additions. Those are huge additions they just made to their already championship roster. They lost a few players. They lost Avery Bradley. They lost Rajon Rondo, who's big in the playoffs, obviously. What do you see these new additions, and what do they bring to the Lakers roster that's already so stacked?
Man, the Lakers, they're not afraid to make big moves. Their GM, even LeBron James, the star player, they know what they're doing. These additions are absolutely this was the best move in the offseason. This team had the best moves. You have a great power forward. I wouldn't say he's top 5, but Montrezl Harrell provided great depth for the Los Angeles Clippers, and who also won 6th Man of the Year. You also have Dennis Schroeder, runner-up for 6th Man of the Year. So I really think these additions are great. You also have Wesley Matthews that provides great 3-point shooting. And you also have the rookie, sophomore. My bad. He scored 31 points in the preseason. Tucker's. So I just see great potential for the Lakers. But how about you?
Yeah, they've set themselves up really well. They recently signed the Anthony Davis on that new deal and gave LeBron an extension. So they set themselves up really well for the future. Now, especially in this, I was a little bit at first. I was a little bit confused about the Harrell signing. For me, that just didn't make sense to me for either player, right? Like Harrell can definitely get a far larger contract somewhere else. I predicted him going to Charlotte because they just have that cap space and they do need a big. I don't think they can just keep relying on Bismack Biyombo. But yeah, at first it didn't make sense to me, and then I took some time to think about it. It's a shortened season. They've had the least amount of rest out of everybody in the league. They're gonna need bench players to, sometimes LeBron has stated that he doesn't believe in load management, but I believe that some games he's just gonna go out and play 18 minutes and then just sit on the bench for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
with these quality role players, and not really role players, but quality players, you're going to be able to rest your stars, and that's going to be most important coming into this offseason if they want to repeat. Speaking of which, the Milwaukee Bucks, who, speaking of big signings, Milwaukee Bucks signed Giannis on that extension, and that ruins a lot of plans for a lot of teams out there, because Miami, who was preparing to offer him a deal this offseason, or next offseason, they signed Goran Dragic and Myers Leonard on the second year as a team option.
Yeah.
So they're probably going to pick up that team option now. But they were preparing to make a signing. And also Toronto. The reason they didn't want to sign Serge Ibaka on a long-term deal was so that they can prepare for
Giannis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they end up losing Serge Ibaka because they were unwilling to sign a long-term deal.
So, during the offseason, Houston made a big trade. They traded Russell Westbrook to the Washington Wizards and John Wall to the Houston Rockets for a future first-round pick. And wow, Steven, what are your thoughts on this?
So, the Washington Wizards, I actually, when it was rumored for this trade to happen, I actually really liked the trade. And a lot of people thought, this was a lose-lose situation for both teams. And I think Houston definitely did lose a little bit on this one, but I really like the trade from the Washington perspective, because you're guaranteeing yourself a playoff seed with Russell Westbrook. That's a guaranteed playoff seed. Even if you didn't have Bradley Beal and you just had like Thomas Bryant as your second best player, you're guaranteed like an 8th seed in the East.
Yep.
So this addition obviously adds a lot of value to Washington, and maybe turns the narrative around in Washington. They might start having a winning sort of culture, turn the sort of narrative of Washington around the last couple of years, which they have been in that gray area. They've been stuck in that gray area. They're not good enough to contend for the playoffs, but not low enough so that they get a top seed in the draft. So yeah, I really like this move in the Washington's perspective. I think that was probably the best thing at the moment they could have done with John Wall. And obviously, for Houston, it all depends on how good John Wall comes back at. He might come back at 50%. He might come back at 20%. He might get injured again. We don't know. And especially with DeMarcus Cousins, you can have 2 stars who are injury prone, right? So I just think Houston maybe screwed up a little bit on this one, But I understand, if you look at the league at the time when they were debating should they trade Russell Westbrook, every team out there was undervaluing Russell Westbrook, right? Every team out there was like, hey, we just saw this guy in the playoffs. He just didn't perform. And you look at all the playoff teams and they're like, yeah, he's a good player. He's a top 15 player for sure. But do I want him on my roster? Do I want to give up assets for him on my roster? And a lot of teams said, nah. So his value was at an all-time low. I think that at that moment, if they had to trade Russell Westbrook at that moment, there wasn't much of a better deal they could have gotten.
I agree. I just need to say, all these teams need to stop with the Russell Westbrook slander.
I know, right? Holy.
He's a top 15. I'm going to say his stats from February. And this was the last full month before the NBA was shut down. Russell Westbrook on the Houston Rockets averaged 33.4 points, 7.3 rebounds, 6.8 assists, and 1.8 steals, all in the month of February. And people are still calling him overrated or he's out of his prime. Now, when this trade happened, I had a lot of mixed thoughts. You know that John Wall has been a part of the Washington Wizards for all of his career.
Yep.
But he also, I'm not sure what he injured, if it was his ACL, but he missed a year.
Right.
And basically, I was very shocked that, Achilles. And I was just very shocked that he got traded right away, that he wanted to leave. But I personally think that Washington won this trade because Russell Westbrook, he's bringing, as I say, a dog mentality to this team. With Bradley Beal, this team is going to be the top 5 backcourts in the whole league. And for John Wall's situation for the Houston Rockets, to be honest, it depends on James Harden. If James Harden gets traded, who's John Wall going to play with? And imagine if James Harden gets traded and the Rockets don't receive an all-star back. I don't think John Wall's had the capability to lead a team by himself with DeMarcus Cousins and with a bunch of small men that just shoot. So I personally think this was a very smart move for the Washington Wizards. But as we see in the preseason action, John Wall has been getting, some points back. But as you said, he's injury prone. You never know what can happen. And I'm very excited to see this young, or at least a bit younger, Washington Wizards team that I will predict will at least make the East semifinals.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with your points. And we're looking at a Bradley Beal who just came off a career year. Like, it seems like we were waiting for something to happen with Bradley Beal. Like, for years he was just averaging 20 points a game. He was a great mid-range shooter. It wasn't quite great with the three. And then suddenly this year, as basically the number one option on your team, he shot like 35% from three as the number one option and scored 30 points a game. So you're being guarded by the other team's best perimeter defender up and down the court for 40 minutes, and you're averaging 30 points and 35% from three.
Yeah.
Once you relieve some of that ball handling responsibility, and you give that to Russell Westbrook, and players have to, the team has the defense has to collapse to make sure Russell Westbrook doesn't get whatever he wants in the paint. Bradley Beal is going to get whatever he wants on the outside. His percentages are going to go up. And maybe his point totals are going to go down, but he's going to be more efficient. He's going to get easier shots with Russell Westbrook around. And this narrative that Russell Westbrook is difficult to play with, I think is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Let's look at the rest of the offseason. Let's particularly look at the large signings that happened for the young players. I think a lot of players from the 2017, 2018 drafts were getting extensions this offseason.
Lots of money. Yeah, I'm just gonna list out some of the players from that draft era that got extension. Jason Tatum, max deal. Most of these are just worth $163 million. Jason Tatum, De'Aaron Fox, Bam Adebayo, Donovan Mitchell, Brandon Ingram. Today, it was reported that Markelle Fultz 3-year, $50 million re-sign with the Orlando Magic. So this trend is, I haven't seen this in another offseason.
So a lot of players from the drafts, 2017, 2018 drafts, are getting extensions right now. And I think those two drafts were particularly, like, Derek White was a later first round pick. I think he was like the 18th pick or something like that, and he's getting a $70 million extension.
Oh wow!
In like the 3 or 4 years I've been actually following in depth in basketball, I haven't seen this many extensions being signed, and I think that it's just the teams investing, making sure they have their young players locked in long term, even as the cap is getting smaller and will continue to get smaller if we stay quarantined and no fans for the next couple of years. I think that it's just making sure that they have these young players for the next few seasons when they will have no cap to re-sign them later.
Yeah, exactly.
Less options to re-sign them later, so it's just ensuring that they have these young players. Now, some of the prices, are questionable. Like, is Donovan Mitchell really worth the same as Jason Tatum? And again, the cap is shrinking. You got to make sure you have these players locked in on long-term contracts, or you might.
The teams have to keep them. Yeah,
the teams have to keep them. And as far as
for sure
go, when you look at Sacramento, I think Sacramento really lost in this offseason. Like, I don't remember if they added anything, but I just know they lost Bogdanovich to Atlanta. And
they also had a power forward, Harry Giles. He was like off the bench. They lost him as well.
To, I think, Portland.
Yeah, Portland.
So, Sacramento's looking just not great. I mean, the only and Buddy Hield, by the way, is already like 27. He's old. He's not young, and he can't play defense. So that's an issue.
That's just an unfortunate, situation down in Sacramento. I do want them to get better, but
Yeah, and in 2018 they did take Marvin Bagley over Luka Doncic.
Yeah, so, I'm still waiting.
Hey, Sacramento fans, it's okay. It's okay to shed a tear once in a while. You guys
it's are in
a really tough position.
I
think one team that we haven't talked about, which is really interesting, is Phoenix. The Phoenix Suns. They added Chris Paul, and now they have Devin Booker. Devin Booker's finally going to make the playoffs. I remember he said, "Yo, I'm dipping if I don't make the playoffs next year," and he didn't make the playoffs next year, and he didn't dip. So good for him.
Yeah, exactly. Crazy team.
Yeah, crazy team right now. Offensively, one of the better teams in the league. They're top 5 offensively. They got a great center in DeAndre Ayton, which, doesn't really justify them taking him over Luka Doncic. But I get it. Like, he's a really good player. He's a lot better than people think he is. I think that the 2018 draft class was just overshadowed by Luka Doncic, and we don't know that DeAndre Ayton's actually averaging 18 points and like 9 rebounds a game.
Yeah.
So he's above average center. He's like a top. I think I rank him maybe number 7, right under Jusuf Nurkic, as far as center rankings go. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's a really good center. He's a really good player. His defense is improving, which was a concern when they were drafting him. But yeah, they look really good. What do you think? Where do you think Phoenix is going to land in the Western Conference?
I got them somewhere in the top 8. Obviously the playoffs, but I got them around the 7th seed or possibly 8th. They're good, but they're obviously not the best. But this Chris Paul edition is great. We have to remind everyone that didn't the Suns go on an 8-0 run in the NBA bubble? They didn't even lose a game.
Yes.
And just to their unfortunate positioning, they couldn't make the playoffs. But they're coming off a hot streak. They're getting who I think is like a top 5 most knowledgeable player in the NBA, Chris Paul. Veteran, knows how to move the ball. With the young core, with Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. And I know this player's getting old, but Jay Crowder performed well for the Miami Heat
really
in the playoffs, and they added him.
Yeah, and they lost Kelly Oubre, which was unfortunate. But adding Jay Crowder fills that gap of wing defense and shooting. They look really good, and I think they can get even higher. I think with OKC, Chris Paul was able to make them a 6th seed in the West. So I think they're like 4th or 5th seed. I think now the West. Granted, the West is looking really good. I think Portland. I really like Portland's addition of Robert Covington, which fills their gap perfectly of lacking of wing defense, and Robert Covington fills that gap perfectly. Hopefully, they don't have like last year. I think it was just Jusuf Nurkic was injured, and Zach Collins was injured, and that was just
it's just unfortunate positioning.
Yeah, and they had to play Hassan Whiteside, who's not good. Last thing before we end, draft. Quick reactions of the draft. Any surprises? Any
draft?
Anything you like a lot, or anything you just completely disgusted by?
Top 3 picks. They're obvious. If I was Minnesota, I would have done Anthony Edwards, James Wiseman. He's going to do great for the Warriors, and LaMelo Ball with the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah, I think
I have him. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a draft a prediction earlier on this channel. And yeah, they were pretty similar. The top 3 picks for me was pretty cut out, and it happened on draft night. I think everybody was surprised by that Patrick Williams pick.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Yeah, I'm gonna defend it. All right, I'm gonna defend it.
All right.
This draft is one of the weakest drafts in the 2010s. We're gonna look back at it and be like, "What the? This draft was terrible." Anthony Edwards is probably the least hyped up first-round pick in the 2010s.
Yeah, seriously.
Dude, if he went in this draft, the 2021 draft, he'd be a low lottery pick at best.
Next year's going to be stacked. We got to be ready for that.
Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green.
It's going to be crazy.
Evan Mobley. It's going to be pretty crazy. And this draft was very underwhelming. So, picking a high potential player in Patrick Williams, high risk, high reward player in Patrick Williams, I can justify it in a weak draft, right? At the 4th
That's
pick.
fair.
Maybe, you could have traded down for it because other teams weren't going to pick it, but you never know, right? And with a weak draft, you honestly couldn't go wrong with almost any pick because it could have been anybody. I do fear that he will end up like Josh Jackson, but there's still a lot of upside because of how athletic he is. I think I compared him. I forgot what my comparison was, but I think it was with Paul Millsap. He was just a great energy guy, great on the boards, strong, really strong, and he's got a solid shot on the perimeter. So yeah, I can completely justify it.
Okay, that's understandable, of course.
Okay, great. Anything else that surprised you? Maybe any prospects you're looking forward to watch?
Okay, that's a good question. I think his name was Obi. Got drafted by the Knicks.
Yeah, Obi Toppin.
Obi Toppin. I just want to see if he's gonna make like an early splash in the regular season. Obviously it was a weak draft class, but I just want to see these players because you never know like the potential. You never know, but definitely Obi Toppin is a player that I'm excited to watch. Are you excited for any player to watch?
Obviously, I'm excited for my Spurs pick, Devin Vassell. I think he's gonna be. He showed a lot of capabilities to defend and shoot the three, and I'm not sure how San Antonio is gonna play this out if he will end up any more than a 3-and-D player. Obviously, this season that might be just what he is, a 3-and-D player, but we'll see. And I'm also like, you can't not get excited to watch LaMelo Ball play, right?
Yeah,
like,
obviously. Yeah.
Obviously, he's a big name. I think it was a great pick by Charlotte, putting a big name to the franchise. And he's shown a lot of capabilities in the preseason with his vision. The question is, can he
very cool passes.
Yeah, great passes. And I'm also excited to see James Wiseman because you've seen very limited college games, right? I think he only played 2 college games.
Yeah,
so he's coming into the NBA basically right out of college or right out of high school, right?
Yeah.
He hasn't spent a lot of time playing college minutes, so he's gonna be like I'd love to see him in that Warriors.
I'm very glad to. Yeah, I'm excited to see him too.
Yeah.
But overall, the draft it was it is what it is, because it wasn't the best class. So the teams had to do what they had to do, but hopefully they have like a high ceiling, lots of potential. But yeah.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, honestly, it just comes down to development, right? And how the franchise treats the prospects, which I'm afraid for with Anthony Edwards, because Minnesota just can't seem to cultivate talent. Andrew Wiggins. So yeah, and I think that about wraps it up. So if you're still listening now, thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
That was just our off-season recap, I guess. Plus the draft. We haven't been posting anything for a long time, so we just covered a lot of ground with this podcast. Hopefully it's not too long, but thanks for listening. We'll hopefully be uploading very often. I think our next one would be opening night reactions. To the opening night on the 22nd, Tuesday. So, see you guys then. All right.
See you guys.